Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Holy Humor number 12. And we're going to start out really calm and plain and relaxing. We're going to start with some thought-provoking questions from people. Letters to God, it's called. And they're from some Sunday school and some a little bit older, but they're going to get you to think. In Sunday school, they told us what you do, dear God. Who does it when you're on vacation? That's from Jane. Or, dear God, I think about you sometimes even when I'm not praying, from Elliot. Or, dear God, did you really mean do unto others as they do unto you? Because if you did, then I'm going to fix my brother, from Darla. Dear God, I didn't think orange went with purple until I saw the sunset you made on Tuesday. That was cool, from Eugene. And from Allison, dear God, I read the Bible. What does begat mean? Nobody will tell me. Or from Lucy, dear God, are you really invisible or is that a trick? Dear God, is it true my father won't get in heaven if he uses his bowling words in the house? Anita. Or from Norma, dear God, did you mean for the giraffe to look like that, or was it an accident? Dear God, instead of letting people die and having to make new ones, why don't you just keep the ones you have now? From Cindy. Thought-provoking, aren't they? Dear God, who draws the lines around countries? From Nan. Or, dear God, the bad people laughed at Noah. They said, you made an ark on dry land, you fool. But Noah was smart. He stuck with you. That's what I would do, from Edward. Dear God, I went to this wedding and they kissed right in church. Is that okay? From Neil. And dear God, what does it mean you are a jealous God? I thought you had everything, from Robert. And dear God, why is Sunday school on Sunday? I thought it was supposed to be our day of rest, from Tom. And dear God, thank you for the baby brother, but what I prayed for was a puppy, from Joyce. A man walking along a California beach was deep in prayer when all of a sudden he said aloud, Lord, grant me one wish. The sky clouded and a booming voice said, because you've tried to be faithful, I will grant you one wish. The man said, build a bridge to Hawaii so I can drive over anytime I want to. The Lord answered, your request is very materialistic. Think of the logistics of that kind of undertaking, the supports required to reach the bottom of the Pacific, the concrete and steel it would take. I can do it, but it's hard for me to justify your desire for worldly things. Take a little more time to think of another wish, a wish you think would honor and glorify me. The man thought for a long time and finally said, Lord, I wish that I could understand women. I want to know what they feel inside, what they're thinking when they give me the silent treatment, why they cry, what they mean when they say nothing, and how I can make a woman truly happy. After a few minutes, God said, how many lanes do you want on that bridge? I think that's hilarious. A middle-aged woman has a heart attack and is taken to the hospital. While on the operating table, she has a near-death experience. During that experience, she sees God and asks if this is it. And God says no, and explains she has another 30 years to live. Upon her recovery, she decides to just stay in the hospital and have a facelift, liposuction, breast augmentation, tummy tuck, etc. She even has someone come in and change her hair color. She figures since she's got another 30 years, she might as well make the most of it. She walks out of the hospital after that last operation and is killed by an ambulance speeding by. She arrives in front of God and complains, I thought you said I had another 30 years. And God replied, I didn't recognize you. One cold evening during the holiday season, a little boy, about 6 or 7, was standing out in front of an ore window. The little child had no shoes on, and his clothes were mere rags. A young woman passing by saw the little boy and could read the longing in his pale blue eyes. She took the child by the hand and led him into the store. There she bought him new shoes and a complete suit of warm clothing. They came back outside into the street, and the woman said to the child, "Now you can go home and have a very happy holiday." The little boy looked up at her and asked, "Are you God, ma'am?" She smiled down at him and replied, "No, son, I'm just one of his children." And the little boy then said, "I knew you had to be some relation." Yes. So God looks over the millions of people and says, "Welcome to heaven. I want the women to go with St. Peter and the men to form 2 lines." I hope I get through this one. "Make one line of the men that dominated their women on the earth, and the other of men who were dominated by their women." There's much movement, but eventually the women are gone, and there are 2 lines. The line of the men that were dominated is 100 miles long. The line of men that dominated women has only 1 man. God gets angry and says, "You men should be ashamed of yourselves. I created you in my image, and you were all dominated by your mates. Look at the only one of my sons that stood up and made me proud. Learn from him." He turns to the man and says, "Tell them, my son, how did you manage to be the only one in that line?" And the man says, "I don't know. My wife told me to stand here." That's really terrible. And I'm going to laugh anyway. Okay. A young woman brought her fiancé home to meet her parents. After dinner, her mother told her father to find out about the young man. The father invited the fiancé to his study for a talk. "So, what are your plans?" the father asked the young man. "I am a biblical scholar," he replied. "A biblical scholar, the father said. "Admirable. But what will you do to provide a nice house for my daughter to live in?" "I will study," the young man replied, "and God will provide for us." "And how will you buy her a beautiful engagement ring, such as she deserves?" asked her father. "I will concentrate on my studies," the young man replied. "God will provide for us." "And children?" asked the father. "How will you support children?" "Don't worry, sir. God will provide," replied the fiancé. The conversation proceeded like this, and each time the father questioned, the young idealist insisted that God would provide. Later, the mother asked, "How did it go, honey?" The father answered, "He has no job and no plans, and he thinks I'm God." Oh, yes. Someone sent this to me. It's kind of cool. As he was entering heaven, Forrest Gump was asked 3 questions by St. Peter. Don't know if you've heard this or not. Meeting Forrest Gump at the pearly gates, St. Peter says, "Well, Forrest, it's certainly good to see you. We have heard a lot about you. I must tell you, though, that the place is filling up fast, and we've been administering an entrance examination for everyone. The test is short, but you have to pass it before you can get into heaven." In his distinct way of pronouncing words, Forrest responds, "It sure is good to be here, St. Peter, sir. But nobody ever told me about any entrance exam. Sure hope the test ain't too hard. Life was a big enough test as it was." St. Peter goes on, "Yes, I know, Forrest, but the test is only 3 questions. First, what 2 days of the week begin with the letter T? Second, how many seconds are there in a year? And third, what is God's first name?" Forrest leaves to think the questions over. He returns the next day and sees St. Peter, who waves him up and says, "Forrest, now that you've had a chance to think the question is over, tell me your answers." Forrest says, "Well, the first one, which 2 days in the week begin with the letter T? Shucks, that one's easy. They'd be today and tomorrow." The saint's eyes open wide and he exclaims, "Forrest, that's not what I was thinking. But you do have a point, and I guess I didn't specify, so I'll give you credit for that answer. How about the next one? How many seconds in a year?" asks St. Peter. "Now that one's harder," says Forrest, "but I thunk and I thunk, and I guess the only answer can be 12. Confounded, St. Peter says, 12? 12? Forrest, how in heaven's name could you come up with 12 seconds in a year?" Forrest says, "Shucks, there's got to be 12. January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd, etc., etc., etc." "Hold it," interrupts St. Peter. "I see where you're going with this, and I see your point. Though that wasn't quite what I had in mind, but I'll have to give you credit for that one too. Let's go on with the third and the final question. Can you tell me God's first name?" "Sure," Forrest replied. "It's Andy." "Andy!" exclaimed an exasperated and frustrated St. Peter. "Okay, I can understand how you came up with your answers to my first two questions, but just how in the world did you come up with the name Andy as the first name of God?" "Well, shucks, that was the easiest of all," Forrest replied. "I learnt it from the song. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own." And St. Peter opened the pearly gates and said, "Run, Forrest, run." Listen, have a great rest of the day and a great week, and may you see God's humor in all kinds of different settings in your life and in the lives of those around you. Amen.